Good morning and welcome to the inaugural session of the webinar Robots on Stage, Fostering Interdisciplinary Convergences Between Robotics and Theatre. Bonjour à tout le monde, bienvenue à ce webinaire à robots en scène, convergence interdisciplinaire entre robotique et théâtre. It's a great pleasure to meet you all, even if virtually. And thank you for joining us today, and a special thanks to the speakers who have accepted our invitation to open this series of meetings. The webinar Robots on Stage is the first activity of research project Scène et Robotique, Interaction et Interrelation. A project led by Dr. Salvatore Anzalone, maître de conférences at the Laboratoire de Cognition Humaine et Artificielle of the Université Paris 8, Dr. Giulia Filacanapa, ATR at the Department Théâtre of the same university, and myself, maître de conférences at the same department as Giulia Filacanapa. The project is mainly supported by the École universitaire de recherche ArTeC, which promotes research in the field of the arts and digital practices and cultures. As you can easily figure out, this is an interdisciplinary research which originates from the meeting of our varied backgrounds and research interests in robotics and theater studies. Robotic devices are often found in contemporary theater. In the last decades, many works have explored the presence of robots on stage in multiple ways, questioning its ethical and scientific implications. These works have been created by artists from very different backgrounds and with different aesthetics. Cyborg theater, robotic theater, metal performance, just to name a few, are part of the larger and well-established field of digital performance today. But this diverse phenomenon is not completely new. A strong connection links theater and robots from a historical perspective, and think about automata shows or also of the theatrical origin of the word robot itself, first used in 1920s plays. Moreover, there is a strong relation between theater and robots at an anthropological level. Robots can be related to masks and puppetry, which are the traditional tools and objects used on stage to create a tension between the human and the artificial, between the living and the inorganic. In our project, we aim to follow this thread by considering the stage as an interdisciplinary laboratory where to study the limits and the possibilities of the human-machine interaction. Specifically, we are interested in the sociability of both robotic devices and theater practices. Interrelation and interaction are indeed the key words of our project. Relation and interaction, firstly, between scholars in robotics, theater, performance studies, as well as practitioners. Secondly, between robots, actors, directors, during the theatrical creative processes and play. And finally, between robots and spectators. Our research is both theoretical and practice-based, and starting from next June, we will organize a series of workshops with different figures of actors. We think of professional, training, amateur, and different kinds of robots, intelligent objects, anthropomorphic or zoomorphic social robots. And by setting up, observing, and analyzing these experiences, we aim at investigating the manifold cognitive and creative processes involved, the dynamics of action-reaction in HMI, as well as the reception, in particular, empathy, plausibility, belief, which originate when robots play with humans on stage. I give now the floor to my colleagues. First, to Giulia Filacanapa. We will introduce in more detail the theatrical background of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika, and thank you of all of you for being there today. So Salvatore just shared with us the program of the day, our three guests, and I will take 3 minutes to introduce you, as Erika says, which is our theoretical point of view. So that project, the Scene and Robotics, is a part of a long process of theoretical and practical research that we have carried out together with Erika as part of the augmented stage, La Scène Augmentée. That it was a project, 3 years project. So since 2015, we are reflecting on the impact of digital technology on theatrical practices from the point of view of the 3 figure keys of 20th century theater. So the actor, the director, and the trainer. What happened to the theater? This is our question. What happened to theater artists when they encounter the body of flesh and blood with synthetic and hybrid one, or now with the robot? How are their technique and working method changing, and how they are trained? So that was our big question. We have studied the form of interaction. Salvatore, you can make, thank you. So we have studied the form of interaction between actor and technology on stage, in particular motion capture, in order to show how these interferences alter the art of speaking and upset the theory of acting. The actor is forced to develop new strategy, which lead to a more flexible way of playing, moving between a real presence and mediated one. During our research, how you can see, the mask has become a conceptual paradigm, but also a concrete tool through which to understand the technological hybridization of the stage and of the way that the body was occupied. In fact, the theatrical mask, that is the central object of my own research, is the instrument for excellence of the actor's augmentation and metamorphosis, an artificial extension of the flesh of body, which transforms it into an hybrid one. The mask has been used since the antiquity, as you know, with the desire to go behind illusion and immediate reality, to find the strange and the other, of course. This is how, on one hand, we developed the scenic research creative device, Mask and Avatar. Here we can see 2 images, putting these 2 extreme forms of otherness in dialogue, Mask and Avatar. And at the other end, we began to develop the concept of technological mask, first introduced by Anna Maria Monteverdi. So, to make a sort of conclusion, our research of the otherness on stage, on the mask, on the avatar, on the hybrid bodies could not ignore the robot. Because, as you know, the only animal that can think inhuman is man. An insect, for example, cannot think in human. So the inhuman is part of human, and as part of that, it was what theater has to deal with. So the difference with mask and with puppet is that the robot is have an autonomy, and that is determinate a radical otherness, which bring up the question of the transcendence of the human. So how can we mobilize and the theater concept like presence, otherness, illusion, repetition, improvisation, identification, distance, dialogue? There are our research perspective from a theater studies point of view. And so now let's listen to Salvatore, what is the perspective of the field of robotics can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Erika. Well, you said already many interesting things, and actually also I don't want to steal too much time to our speaker, but just to can I say, just to tell from my point of view how this happened. Actually, I'm very happy to be here. And actually, I want to thank you, Giulia and Erika, because of organizing this thing. I'm actually really happy. You know, when I was in Osaka, I was PhD, doing my PhD in Osaka in the Scuola laboratory. I was amazed about the work of my colleagues. It was like in the next room, playing with the android in the theater. Actually, to be honest, you know, at the beginning, I was kind of skeptical. You know, I was the kind of fresh engineer that was not able to take seriously anything without mathematics. But then, you know, I was starting to focus on this idea of social robotics, this idea of modeling the basic socio-cognitive skills that could give robots the ability of interacting coherently with humans. And I become aware that the more I deepen my studies, the more I become aware about the potential of this approach, of the approach taken by Ishiguro and Orizza. After that, I come in Europe, I come in Paris, I start to focus in other things, and more on neurodevelopmental deficits and the use of robotics with autism assistance. But this idea of the theater, of the play, remained in some way in my mind. And then when I arrived in Paris 8, I started to search for people, and I was lucky to find Giulia and Erika. You know, the point for me is, okay, if you go, like, I don't know, if you go on Wikipedia, no, and you search the definition of artificial intelligence, okay, if we keep apart the definition about general intelligence, general artificial intelligence, I mean, and you know, defining intelligence is something that is complicated. So we just prefer to rely to some maybe easier definitions, more practical. So we talk about systems that are able to do tasks that we usually associate to what we can call intelligence, wherever intelligence could be. It's like more mimicking intelligence. More or less is like, okay, if you perceive it, this is really like Turing, like the Turing test. If you perceive it as an intelligent, then it's intelligence. Okay. So this in robotics, and in particular in social robotics, this translates in the development of systems that are able to elicit what the people from Disney in the 80s called the illusion of life. but this challenge, actually this is a challenge, this challenge of being believable. The center of believability actually is something that is shared between robots and roboticists, and also it's shared with the actors and directors. I mean, what is believable? What is human likeness? What is familiarity? And also, why do we become involved? Think about Bambi, you know, we feel empathy toward people, toward objects that like artificial creatures, like robots, that actually we know they are just pretending, they are fakes, but we feel something. Okay, for me, those are questions that are maybe the starting point for this seminar, but maybe not only for this seminar, maybe for more in general for the for a cross fertilization of our both fields. So, well, I don't know, maybe, yeah, Erika, I don't know if you want to continue.
Yes, I just briefly conclude this introduction, just to give you some hints about the webinar as a whole. So we really, as Salvatore said, we really imagined the webinar as an opportunity of sharing knowledge, questions, and maybe to starting new collaboration between our two disciplines. And in every session, we have invited scholars and practitioners in both areas. And the program is organized in two parts. The first two webinars, this one and the one at the 26th of March, are more theoretical, and we will discuss about potential intersection and similar theoretical concepts, in particular embodiment, behavior, interaction in the two disciplines. And the next two webinars will focus on specific theater works which explore in different ways the human-robot relationship. Quand et Légende by Joël Pomera in the third, and there are no robots on stage in this show, but just human actors who are playing robots. So it's a particular point of view. And the fourth webinar will be focused on the work of Irato Rizza which we had already mentioned, and in particular on Sayonara. But let's start today with this inaugural session, which will introduce us to the challenges and research prospects at the crossing between robotics, arts, and theater, with our speaker, Professor Paolo Dario, Professor Andrea Bonarini, and Dr. Izabella Pluta. So just to give you some more details about the organization of the session, we will have a short time for questions after every presentation, and then a longer general open discussion. And if you want to ask a question, please use the function raise hand. Okay, and we will give you the how do you say, the possibility of speaking. I don't know how to say it. Sorry. So I will just shut down now, and Giulia, please, to you to introduce our first speaker.
Yes, so it is with great pleasure and gratitude that I introduce our first and special guest, Professor Paolo Dario, who does us the honor to open this cycle of webinar. Paolo Dario, as you know, probably is professor of biomedical robotics and pro-rector for the university's third mission at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Study in Pisa, where he's also the head of the BioRobotics Institute. world-renowned scholar. His main research interests are in the field of the biorobotics and the robotics for surgery and rehabilitation and microendoscopy. Today, he presents a paper entitled Robot Companion, How Science Fiction is Become Reality. Professor, I leave you the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Thanks to Salvatore, Giulia, and Erica for organizing so nicely this webinar. And I hope to be able to share with you my slides. Can you see the slides?
Perfect.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thank you very much. What I'm going to share with you today is a little bit of history and a little bit of perspective on the future of robotics, including some experience on robots on stage. Okay, so it will be a sort of trip. Because I've been around for a while in this field. By the way, I see my colleagues, a very good friend, Giulio Sandini, in the audience. And, you know, actually, we started, in the late 80s, we were working together on bionics. There is a sort of a new discipline that is now well consolidated. In fact, it's about substitution, about understanding human beings, especially artificial organs, and creating replicas of living creatures. So I've been around for a while, and so I can tell you something about the evolution of BioRobotics and bionics in particular, starting from the birth of modern robotics in the 60s, the creation of the service and humanoid robotics in the 70s and 80s of last century, the birth of bionics and the tremendous progress that occurred in the 80s thanks to the fusion of the core of robotics that, you know, is mechatronics essentially. It means the combination of a mechanical platform with electronics. That means sensors, actuators, batteries, control, in some degree of intelligent connection and so on. And here you see how science and also different engineering disciplines converged in the 80s to create what is known, of course, as robotics, but also as biorobotics. And you see here Giulio Sandini as one of the fathers, if you will, with what I call the Genova School of biorobotics and bionics. Together, we wrote a very nice book, I should say it like that. It's still on Amazon, by the way. That introduced the keyword of bionics again. And altogether, these things are now representing a frontier of robotics that goes beyond industrial applications. So you see, it's a grand scene that describes, in a schematic way, the main steps. Actually, based on this vision and the number of concrete applications, together with my colleagues, we are now more than 250 people. We have created in Pisa, in Pontedera, an institute, a BioRobotics Institute, that is addressing a number of scientific issues, but also a number of applications. So what we have done is investigating the essence of robotics from a very much bioengineering point of view, so a human-centered approach rather than a machine-centered approach. And then trying to transfer this knowledge into applications. And you see here a number of applications of robots, from education to prosthetics, to rehabilitation, to disassembly, to industrial application, to exoskeletons, to neurorobotics, to manual robotics, to neurodevelopmental engineering, to marine applications in science, and including services and theaters. And this is what I like to call it around the end of my presentation. Very few people know that in 2003, that means almost 20 years ago, there was a very interesting event organized in Paris at La Maison de la Culture du Japon. And together with colleagues of mine, particularly Professor Takanishi from Waseda University, I was one of the speakers, and we tried to investigate at that time what could be the differences between Japan and Europe. Why Japan? Because you know, at that time Japan was considered as a leading country for research in robotics. Still true, but with a lot of novel contributions from Europe, from China, Korea. So there are now many actors, but at that time, robotics was, Japan was a sort of center of research. So the point is, what would be the difference and how robots could be accepted in the same way in Japan and Europe? This was the question. And one of the observations that I made is that the Judeo-Christian religious roots in Western countries essentially bring to some ideas about the artificial creatures, you know, like the robots. For example, the golem, the Jewish myth, if you will, is about a creature that has a body but no soul. And this is essential what in our Judeo-Christian culture was associated with the idea of artificial creation, including Pinocchio, you know, or Frankenstein, of course, or the superheroes. The superheroes are in our culture humans with the superpowers. And Pinocchio is in fact unhappy. Why? Because he's not a child. So the dream of Pinocchio, if you will, the dream of a humanoid robot is to become a human boy when he becomes good, because otherwise is not perfect. Different is the perception of robots, if you will, in Japan. Actually, Astro Boy is a good robot boy, or other space robot or Doraemon. They are robots. They are perfectly fine with their status and their friend, helper. So it's a very positive attitude in Japan towards artificial creation. We can discuss about that. It's a very simple. It's a simplification, I know, but it's interesting to remember this. And to use this kind of concept in order to describe the evolution of robotics. How did robotics evolve? First of all, as I already described in my grand scenario, if you will, is the need for developing helpful machines. So humans want to be helped. And so we have developed industrial robots, industrial automation, service robots, space applications. Consider the case of Perseverance, which is now in Mars, as a fantastic application. Of course, medical robotic, clinical application to the personal assistant, okay, a personal robot. And there is another very interesting line of development that is essentially different from the need, that is the dream. So need and dream, the humans dream of replicating themselves that went through many cases. I'm just mentioning Leonardo robot, but also the dolls of Switzerland, or the Karakuri dolls in Japan, or the humanoids. So at the end, this is the idea to create the area of, if you will, companion robots, in which you have both the dream and the need for solving, helping. Science fiction, science fiction is a literature genre that not highly estimated by some intellectual people, I must say, but actually a very interesting area of literature aiming at predicting, but also at the same time inspiring great challenges. So I was inspired myself. Some books like Isaac Asimov, for example, that actually predicted what is then reality. Medical robotics, using robots for surgery was considered a crazy idea even in the 80s, and a sort of science fiction. But today, 30 years ago, practically 40 now, is a dream job for real engineers. It's an opportunity that was anticipated by science fiction and became a reality. It is a reality today. I myself, as I said, together with colleagues like Professor Shigeru Hirose, is a famous colleague in Japan, and he stated that it was inspired by Astro Boy, and many Japanese of that age, same as I, in fact, were inspired by science fiction, and also by the moon challenge. There were lots of I would say excitement and inspiration for that. Very practically, the idea, we are engineers ultimately, so we were inspired by science fiction, but then our challenge was how to remove the sound. But this is another kind of inspiration that we were really we were inspired by this, for example, by Star Wars, okay? Building the most advanced hand prosthesis available in the world for amputatees. This was my own dream, and then this gradually became a reality. This became a reality. And this is a case, of course, a lot of colleagues were involved in research on this, both in the area of prosthetics and the area of robotics. Here I mentioned many of them until how the dream became a reality. This guy is an amputee who is controlling his hand with his brain. It's a fantastic representation of how this dream, you see the dream here, a cybernetic or bionic prosthetic hand that is controlled by the brain through implantable interfaces. Those are nerves, and it's a nerve and axons going through electrodes and essentially allowing the brain to communicate with the hand and vice versa. And today, this is the reality. This is what my former students and now colleagues like Silvestro Micera are developing together with the surgeons. Essentially, this is becoming, it was a dream, it was a science fiction, and is today a reality in a limited amount of cases, but it's a reality, and more could come. We're here at a fantastic frontier in which a paraplegic person like this is able to walk again by means of neural stimulation that can be performed by means of the same or similar technology that I've shown. So you see science fiction and science. But of course, predicting the future, like science fiction. It's not easy. And this is something I like very, very much. Discussing and thinking on how to predict the future. And we predict the future, and etc. It is not easy. And in fact, for example, the case of Blade Runner, many people don't really observe that in Blade Runner, there is a future in which cars fly, but there are still phone booths. So the guys stop, park their car, and make telephone calls from a phone booth. That means essentially that even cell phones were not predicted by science fiction, because predicting incremental innovations is relatively easy. So going from this telephone to this one, or from this wheel to this one, it's conceptually not so difficult. And in a sense, even famous Moore's law that is very popular in engineering, that predicts that the number of transistors on a microprocessor chip would double every 2 years. So it's easy to predict. This will happen because it depends on intelligence. But the reality is that unpredictable events are sometimes most important. And we go back to science fiction, to the beautiful saga of Foundation by Isaac Asimov, who wrote about, and he imagined that a science could be created, very, very interesting concept, very interdisciplinary science based on history, sociology, mathematical, statistics, and essentially that it could be possible to predict the future. He called this psychohistory. And he stated, this scientist, Harry Seldon, stated that predicting the future by means of science is possible. But the reality is that one sad day, a mutant, the mule, came from the frontier, from the end of the galaxies, and he disrupted Seldon's psychohistory by invalidating Seldon's assumption. So the mutation is just like the coronavirus, right? That is mutated. We are trying to catch it and create vaccine, and the virus tried to evolve, new mutate, and this is something that happens. And in fact, from this point of view, Steve Jobs is like the mule in Foundation. Okay, he created, of course, he and other people like him created a disruptive discontinuity. It seems what we are doing seems forever, but actually the reality is that the iPhone was introduced in 2007, and all the world changed. A disruptive innovation that changed the world and allowed companies that were non-existent at that time or just before. I'm just mentioning Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon, Uber, WhatsApp, WeChat. All these apps and companies were simply non-existent, and they were essentially enabled by these unexpected revolutions. Sorry, there is some noise, but I did not. So, just to say here, how the science can lead to disruptive innovation. So there is a way to predict the future where no, but science is something that can essentially revolutionize engineering. And this is what, in fact, we can observe, because the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to the discovery of the transistor. And then the transistor created a revolution in everything, including computer, and ultimately in robotics. So from science to engineering. So it's a quite important point, because innovation makes dream true, starting from Asimov, transistor technology, Engelberger's robotics, industrial robots, and then the advent of technology of MEMS, material electromechanical systems, cloud, the web, and all together cloud robotics, and maybe back to what Asimov predicted. Because it is, in my opinion, probably the most fascinating piece of science fiction that is, and a very, very interesting model for us. You know, what is this word of Chicago 2035 is, sorry, is a world in which humans and robots coexist. They are sort of companions, in fact. So how realistic this could be? No, this is the challenge. This is science fiction. This is like Star Wars when I was inspired to create the artificial hand. Will we be able to develop these kind of things? Well, it's a lot of content in iRobot. The movie 2004 is much better than the book, in my opinion. And there are many, many subtle but also very interesting hints. For example, the fact that this is, you know, is a dull robot, you know, is a good robot with NS4 that is following the 3 laws of robotics, while the NS5 is the bad robot in which the 3 laws of robotics have been cracked. So it's out of control. So the point is, how far are we from this developing a robot like the iRobot in the iRobot movie? And the fact is that we are not able at all to do that, not yet. Those are just examples of failures, with all respect for my colleagues. And there is a grand vision of the progress of robotics that we can develop, you know, and this is predicting the future. Okay? So the first wave of robotics is industrial robotics, second wave is the semi-robotic, the third wave is the one we are now, in which lots of scientific knowledge, traditional robots, but also new material, cognitive science, the issue of energy, the issue of intelligence, of course, in connection to the web, are explored, so that maybe we could come to a technology of robot companions in 2035. And I played myself with this. So how far are we from the Chicago 2035 robot companions? And in order to do that, we have analyzed a number of technologies. For example, degrees of freedom. I just tell you the concept, you know, by the way, here is an iRobot movie, and here is the number of the mobility, if you will, of mechanism, and how this could continue in a predictable manner, whereas here there could be the discontinuity, you know, like the Steve Jobs invention of the iPhone or something equivalent. And so which kind of progress are we doing? Which kind of progress we will do in degrees of freedom, but also in movements, the ability to move, or the ability to exert a force. You see that if this is the champion of weightlifting, and we take the relation between body weight and payload, we are now still very far from 1.5, that is the world record. So, but still moving and making progress. You know, this is something that is very important, like materials. In materials, a revolution is happening, and I'm just showing some of these events, you know, that are happening, and they are illustrating this work of Michael, Sheila Mask, Mazzolai, Matteo Cianchetti, and others, who are essentially developing robots that have controlled the body, and in which it is the intelligence in the makes the difference, not only the something that can be inspiration also from plants. You know, there are plants are a fantastic example for engineering too. And intelligence, of course, is the most fascinating performance of the module of future companion robots. And an observation that I made, by the way, is that in the 60s, when I was an adolescent, you see, our dream of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that time the intelligence was in HAL 9000, a supercomputer. Today, in iRobot, the intelligence is a connection, you know, actually connection, and is on the web, is a distributed intelligence. And for example, nobody could predict that, even science fiction, that there would be a web. Of course, some writers predicted to some extent, but limited. Nobody could predict the revolution of the iPhone and of the web. So we are moving essentially from the concept of centralized intelligence to the concept of distributed local control, and maybe decentralized intelligence, like in the octopus. You know, the octopus has very, let's call, smart or sometimes even intelligent behavior, but 65% of the neurons, if you will, of the intelligence are in the arms and not in the central brain. So it's an interesting example. Another important ability of robots is collaboration. And I think this very, very important to know. You know, while in the 80s, 90s, and 2000, robots could only work closed in a cage. Today, robots are able to do this. By the way, this is Professor Sami Al-Dadin doing this work, quite impressive, showing that today robots can be controlled essentially to be harnessed. It's a revolution. Okay? It's a European-based revolution, by the way. And Sami Al-Dadin was a brilliant student. Today is director of the school, very young director of the School of Robotic Machine Intelligence at the University of Munich. And then interaction. So robot companions. So what about empathy, gentleness, deep emotional interaction? Still, you know, this is something that is also included in iRobot. Glimpsing the eye blink, you know, that the robot is doing means essentially my emotions. And the question here is, are you able to read my emotions? It's one example. I'm going towards trying to go towards the end of my talk with our experience in robotics and art, because we started late 2000. We have been involved in a number of applications of robot together with artists, or attention to what is with the essence of robotics and artistic collaboration. Of course, this was done not in a truly systematic way, but I think it's something that we can share. For example, 2 years ago, we organized a very successful symposium on Leonardo. You know, Leonardo, of course, is a source of inspiration for many million people, and of course for scientists. And he also designed a robot. And we have investigated together with colleagues, for example, Dr. Talia Lagamba, who wrote this very interesting book about automation robotics, trying to analyze the mechanism. And essentially, what was possible at the time of Leonardo was essentially the ability to use, for example, mechanism. Okay? There was the problem on Leonardo, who developed a drummer robot that inspired us later, or this kind of chariot, and is essentially in the secret of mechanism. And by the way, a spin-off company, a team in our laboratory head by Nicola Vitiello, developed a mechanism with no kind of motor. This is based on the equivalent of spring mechanism today an exoskeleton that is wearable and that can help workers to perform heavy or even frail people in the future for that. So, you know, this idea of using mechanical model is in fact the technological bottleneck, because according to the mechatronic platform, Leonardo did not have essentially energy supply. And of course, it did not have sensors, embedded control, any kind of machine. It only had a mechanism and actuator, but this was interesting. But some people, many people believe that Leonardo da Vinci was sort of perfect guy, but he was not. Of course, in this diagram, I try to show how Leonardo da Vinci took advantage of previous knowledge in natural science and predicted something like science-based engineering, importance of body, bionics, but he failed to predict or to consider the evolution that happened even at that time about electricity and magnetics. So he was unable to understand the impact, the role of this. And we go back to the idea of predicting the future. Now, quickly about our experience with the robots on the stage. Actually, this is what we have done in a small town near Pisa, actually, in which, in collaboration with the administration, we have developed robots, service robots for waste collection, by the way, together with people. So it was an interesting and very, I would say, open environment for curiosity, because you need to do that. We have created a reciprocal confidence in and using robots in different contexts like that, for example, with real users, elderly people, caregivers. So what happened is that we had a meeting. I personally met in Korea a company called Robotics, which wished to develop some theatrical work for children, essentially. A Roborama theater, this was called. So the marionette, what they did is what create a script like the Adventure of Dorothy, based on the wonderful Wizard of Oz. So this was the script. And what we decided, we agreed to do, is to test this Roborama theater in Italy. Why? Because in Italy there is a tradition for robotics marionette. Actually, there is a tradition in Europe. And there were some business objectives, essentially to see if a marionette robot show could be a valuable business. I think this is interesting for everybody, also in the audience and in this project. So what we did, of course, is to investigate some history about the poop puppet. What is the puppet? What is the marionette? Actually, marionette is from French, is the equivalent to Marion, so Marie, and articulated puppet of dolls. And then there are puppets in Egypt, the buraku in Japan, and the Katputli in India, and the Italian tradition that is considered, in fact, Italy as the birthplace of the marionette theater. So we tried to take advantage of the Italian tradition, including the Opera dei Pupi. I think Salvatore is from Palermo, so he knows very well the Opera dei Pupi in Sicily, of course. So we were inspired by this. but and there is, of course, innovation in this area in puppet. So, for example, this is a company that had developed innovation. Many people are doing innovation, but also in the USA, the Mac, for example. So there were innovation that could be considered. So puppetry is a constantly evolving art. And the idea is about, there were some questions that we wanted to ask. Are robotic puppets still need puppeteers or not? And the answer is yes. What about improvisation that could be used or not? So what we have done is to design a show with a drummer robot. So there was a script with three main performances: drummer robot, puppet robot, and then robot dancing dogs, and the human actor who helped to do that. The total duration was 40 to 60 minutes, depending on the interaction between the audience and the actor. It was a very interesting experience. It was announced initiative, and we, by the way, this is the team. This is me. There are three and a friend. The was Andrea, who is now there. To do that. I don't have too much time, so I just wish to summarize what we did. We started with the product, very serious work, by the way. On August 22nd, 2011, the container with the material arrived at the Roborama studio in Petroli. We made the pre-show, and then the refinement of the performance, the press release, the launching event, 6 performances over there, and then technical refinement and distribution. So we designed the Roborama stage. This is the platform with size, very professional. Everything was investigated. We have the script and the dubbing experience because our actors who essentially dubbed the robots, very professional. And this is the organization chart with the business supervisor, art issues, technical issues, and the test. So the pre-show with feedback about the performance, you know, how much did they like, how much they did not. And in September 2011, we did the performance. The tickets, you know, also was made on market analysis. It was about €5 for children and €7 for adults, and there was no problem. I would say the people liked that. And then this was the feedback from the audience. Essentially, the idea is that the target audience of the Roborama show is 6-10-year-old children and their families. And you see the audience. Of course, some of them were physical audience, some was based on broadcast, so estimated like 1.8 million people who were reached by this technology. And this is an example how the show was conducted. Again, this is the one case of show. Just to show you that this was fun. What were the lessons learned? I'm going really to conclusion. A big problem is a limited audience. In a sense, it's the same problem theaters have today due to the COVID. So limited audience. Then the second important key issue is the importance of the script. And by the way, here we see that there is a real difference between the Asian culture from Korea and the Western country. So culture, much more can be done. We need, and we go back to the idea of the dream of Chicago 2035, we need to have high-performance robot because people, including children, would like to be surprised, and the performance should be dependable, should be repeatable. So the performance, the robot should work well. And the role of the human actor is extremely important. Then we organized other events like the big international festival Robotics in Pisa with more than 10,000 attendees. And now, of course, we have idea that is more concrete about what is necessary to build the robot companion for 2035 that is rapidly approaching. And this is a list of what would be needed. I conclude with my own observation, and some people are really interested in robot intelligence. I must say that I'm more interested in the ability of biological systems, including humans, to perform physical, graceful technology. So my dream is not that much to develop, I must admit, fully intelligent robots, but rather to develop the technology of graceful behavior. And you see, like a cat, like a dancer, it's fantastic. It's a real big challenge. And in fact, it's very much related to what probably is needed in with theater. And with this, I thank you for your attention very much.
Thank you, Paolo, Dario, really thank you for that contribution, that it's very inspiring and very interesting and very rich. And I think that we are full of questions for you. I find your intervention very accessible, also for the people like me that we are not specialized in robotics. And when you say that innovation make a dream true, I'm totally agree with you. And in a way that the stage theater is a play where that dream can be alive. So I have several questions, but
Julia, can I take one point about that? That's very important. As a professor, one of my the key issues how to create innovators, because innovation comes from innovators.
Yes.
The only way to innovate is to have innovators. Wow. So now the point is, in engineering, in traditional engineering, I'm pretty sure that Andrea, Giulio, and Antonio, maybe colleagues who are also in engineering, we know that traditional engineering education was, of the last century, was against innovation, in a sense. Okay? So we educated for centuries engineers for industrial manufacturing, this kind of thing. So while in arts, for example, Italy, but Europe is very strong in things like arts, culture, cuisine, fashion. And those are places where innovation is the key. There are no ways of surviving without innovation. So my point is that one of the real benefits that I see in a collaboration between engineering and arts and theater, for example, is about that. Is by helping, educating together innovators.
And perhaps this is our role in a way, the role of the academician and the university. And in a way, I think that some projects like ours that can put together people that have a different point of view and different perspective can, I don't know, perhaps create some innovators. So if you have some question, please raise your hand. And if I can start I'd like to make a question, Paolo, because I know that in your career you also being one of the person who wrote the manifesto of ethical problem of robotics, and to open that project, I think that it's very important to us to understand which is also the ethics problem that robotic put and make. So if you can just in short.
I will share with you the conclusion. You know, we have been working for, we have been the first in the world, by the way, okay? But, you know, there's sometimes things that happen in the USA are easily quoted by Americans. But anyhow, we started in 2000, and Giulio was also participating in the first meetings we had together with people like Vincenzo Tagliasco and other were deeply involved in that. I can tell you the conclusion. Essentially, the conclusion of our work is that there are two kinds of ethics. One is the ethics for robots, like in the case of iRobot, in the case of the robot in which so what was the ethics of that robot? Were the laws of robotics that were essentially made as a hardware chip in the positronic brain of the robot, you know, and that essentially imposed an ethics, okay, to the robot. Incidentally, I still see the 3+1, by the way, laws of robotics conceived by Asimov still very appropriate, by the way. And in fact, the autonomous cars that Toyota is developing are based on rules that are very similar. Very similar. We're talking about autonomous cars that are a real kind of robot that we are going to have very soon. Then the point is that this kind of ethics is probably not realistic because the intelligence of robots is not that level of autonomy in general. So what is the real ethics? Is the ethics for the constructors of robots. So not the ethics for robots, but an ethics for constructors of robots. So we came to the conclusion that the real effort that has to be made is an education. So educating robot designers, robot engineers at large who would be able to understand the consequences of their actions. But you know, this is exactly the same as in the web, the apps, the hackers. So there are people who are sometimes doing crimes, if you will. And so the competition is between design and regulation. But essentially at this time, robots are totally innocent. Okay? Robots and who are responsible are the humans who design the robot. And in fact, Julia, we stopped doing research on robot ethics, and we moved to do research on robot laws, legal aspects. That is in fact very, very important, more than just ethics. Of course, ethics is there in the background, let's say, is a very important issue. But the practical issue is how to regulate. So how to regulate the autonomy of cars, for example, and so how is regulating the autonomy of robot weapons, for example, or in the near future of robot systems. But this is more related to legal issues like responsibility of the manufacturer, of the service companies, and so on. So it's a very interesting area in which ethics and law are very strictly related.
Thank you, Paolo. Some question? Yes, we have Pedro Torres that wanted to make a question.
Yes. Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Et First of all, I'd like to say thank you for this webinar. So it's very interesting for me. I'm a student in EUR ArTeC, and my research it's about the theater and robots. And I'm glad to participate with people that it's made part of my research. That I read lots of articles from Izabella Pluta and Erica Magri. It's very nice to see you. But my questions, I have some questions, but I make just one for the professor. When you talk about innovation, Professor Dario, sometimes in the question of robots and everything, I ask myself how people from humanities, from theater, from art can participate in this kind of technological innovation, because sometimes it looks like very restricted for engineers and for robotic specialists and informaticians and something like that. And so my question, how people from humanities, from art, can participate in this kind of technological innovation?
Yeah, Pedro, thank you very much. Actually, people from arts, theater can participate very, very deeply. I would, okay, first point, I try to be fast, of course, but if you look at the new Horizon Europe program, you will see a change of paradigm in, and the deep involvement of humanities and social science in the next European development. Very, very important. Pointing out that actually I have a vision, you know, we cannot compete with the giga tech company of the USA and China. Okay, it's very, we can, but it's very difficult. The way in which we could compete is, in fact, by putting together engineering, science, engineering, and arts. Arts means liberal arts, means social and human science. By developing new things, from robots to ICT to apps, taking in a way that is human-centered and takes into account the essence of humanity, culture, thinking, spiritual issues, and interaction, and you know, what is our essence of being humans. I'm very much confident that this can be a tool to compete. So I'm very optimistic on that. Second point, and then I finish, is Giulio Sandini knows very well, my friend Giulio, who's there, that in 10 years ago, we fought, actually together with Roberto Cingolani, who is together the minister, because, you know, you should also follow people, okay, through years. At that time, with Roberto Cingolani, with Giulio and other colleagues, we prepared a European project on robotics that should change the history of, and in fact, it would have. Actually, we lost for just one position, and it was called Robot Companions for Citizens. It was 10 years ago. And the idea, you know, I discussed the demonstrator, you know, what would be, in my opinion, the best demonstrator? The best demonstrator could be a robot dancer. But not just a robot dancer like sometimes we see in Japanese, that is moving. No, a robot dancer like Richard Gere in the movie, you know, that kind, or the lady there, I remember who is, waltzer or tango. This is really the challenge for robotics, in my opinion. That is an incredible mix of body, performance, and emotion. And so this is the answer to your question. This is a kind, in my opinion, of collaboration for innovation that could be done by putting together scientists because there is a science of movement. So, for example, neuroscientists and zoologists, biology, and so on. Engineers with new material, new control, and so on, and artists at large. So this is, in my opinion, a very lively demonstration. Unfortunately, we lost, by the way, but there are still people, by the way, also in France, who are still working on this idea. So it's an example, I think, a very practical of how innovation could come by putting together science, engineering, and arts.
Thank you so much, Paolo. And there is some other question. Otherwise, I think that it's the moment to, Salvatore, we can pass to the next speakers.
Yeah, maybe.
Or do you have a question?
Maybe I think so. I think we can pass to Andrea Bonarini. Thank you, Professor Dario, for your interesting talk and your interesting insights. Okay, Professor Bonarini is actually the head of the IRI lab, the Artificial Intelligence and Robotics lab from Politecnico di Milano. He focuses on the development of machine learning algorithms, intelligent objects, and robots. Most of the robots are social robots for entertainment. This is something that really amazes me, for playing in many senses, and particularly for people with disabilities. The nice thing, the thing that I really like from his approach is this joint effort with the psychologists, designers, and artists. He pursued in the development of affective interactive machines. So I leave the microphone.
Yeah, the microphone, the floor, whatever you like. This is virtual stuff. Well, can I share the screen? Yes.
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. This is my screen. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the chance to have all these kind of meetings, because I think they're very interesting. Actually, I'm an engineer. I'm working on robotics since the early 80s. And we make robots at Air Lab since the 84, 85. I'm also working, fortunately, luckily, with designers. Since 9 years, we have a course of robots and design. And I enjoy very much the interaction with designers, because they bring a completely different way of thinking in the development of things. They know how to make things, but they don't know anything about technology. And this is interesting, because we have to put together engineers and designers. Many designers also acquire the ability of using technology, as do many artists, a very exceptional ability in using technology. But often it's important to interact. So between engineers that maybe have experienced in developing technology, and designers, artists, and so. And we also had an interesting experience, as mentioned by Salvatore, with a network, a European network, was called LUDI, Play for Children with Disability, where we were about 200 people sharing experiences from sociologists, psychologists, therapists, engineers, and so and so. That was very interesting to understand what's it's needed, for instance, for kids with disabilities, to make them engaged in a game, engaged in playing, which is even more difficult than engaging in playing people, real people, and engaging people in general. So I'm working since many years in trying to understand what are the basic mechanisms to at least show emotions, at least try to involve people. But let's go a little bit in theater. So from my point of view, I started to think and work about theaters and robots years ago because I thought it was a big challenge and an opportunity for a roboticist to have a robot on the stage. So let's imagine that we have a goal to design a social robot. This is something that requires something like the need to survive in a shared environment with people, perform some design task because tasks are the way the robots are there, and actually perform the design tasks and interact with people. And these are things that in theater can be very much explored, very well explored. The situations that an actor should face can be designed, so we can design the specific things that may happen. Behaviors can be scripted, so we may define, and defining things is something that makes it possible to implement things. If you go to the first statements for the AI school in Dartmouth, one of the basic ideas that were beyond the development of an intelligent machine was from the engineers asking to philosophers, psychologists, and so, please tell us what we have to implement, and then we will be able to do. So the first thing is to be able to understand what we would like to do, and theater is doing that job. Reality can be played and rehearsed, so we can try things. Instead of having a robot at home with an elderly, we can have the robot on the background of a scene and play and rehearse. And then so it's possible to tune and refine. So it's a beautiful workshop place to try things and try to develop a real robot, social robot. And then we have public. Public, if you see public that is coughing, is not looking at the scene, and so you understand that something is not working, something is wrong. If you have public that is participating actively, you see that this is working, and you have done a good job. Theater is real. I like very much this statement by Eugenio Barba that says, I have it actually on my magnetic board on the back of my office desk. I love theater because illusion repel me. Real situation can be designed for theater where they can really happen. So we are not doing fake things there. We are doing real things. And this is very important. They should be real. But we have a lot of issues. So we have a lot of issues, both for social robots, but also for robot actors. And so let's go a little bit through them before trying to investigate some suggestions. The first issue that was mentioned also by Paolo is survival. Survival is something very important. In engineering, we have one of the parameters that are essential for machines is this MTBF, the medium time between failure. So for a social robot and also for a robot on stage, we need that this should be more than several months. We need to have affordable machines. And this means low complexity from one side and good design from the other side. Here we have two examples. One is Atlas, is a big complexity. And we all have seen, I think, the ballot they did for the end of the year. But if you read the paper that they wrote, they said, okay, we were able to do that ballot, but we had to fix this robot many times because it is not really affordable. It breaks a lot. On the other side, I would not like to compare. It's very, very simple robot. This is a robot intended to play with autistic children, but this is operational in a place where children jump on it, beat it, caress it, hug it since 4 years. And we just went once to change the batteries. Usefulness, you live if you actually do the job, so really do the job. This means that you have sensors and actuators that are working well, so they're doing the job. They can actually detect what is needed, and they can do what they need. And then we have software that has to interpret sensors, plan, act, and do all the things. And again, here we have some examples. So Sophia, the robot that has got this famous citizenship in Arabia, it cannot move. So it should sit off, talking well, but it cannot move. On the other side, we have a robot that is moving and expressing emotion, but cannot speak because it's very simple. So there are things that, and we have to think about the usefulness. For Sophia, the usefulness was to get money. That's fine. For this one was to have the possibility to study what does it mean to express emotions. And then usability, user-friendliness. So in our case, for a robot, we would like to have a nice interface that can allow to program the robot well and have it working. So we may have a visual interface or a joystick or something that should be very user-friendly. This is one of the topics. Another topic is interaction. Interaction means that we have channels to exploit, visual channels, sound, interpretation of the signals. So we need to be able to interpret the signals. So for instance, it's true that it's possible to talk with the computer now if you have your microphone close to your mouth. But if you're on stage and the public is doing something and the stage is maybe a little bit big or the sound is not so good, this may be a challenge. Then we have to interpret these signals. Then we have to decide the action. And if it is scripted, it's okay. But if it is not scripted, or if something happens on the stage that is strange and unexpected, how can we manage this? And then we have to perform the actuation. And again, this should be done reliably. And the next step is communication. Communication means to have the ability to convey content, which can be predefined. We have a script, for instance. When we play often, we have a script. And here we have a famous script. But when we see this kind of things, you may notice that in part written, like this Romeo that is talking aside, is not talking to the actors, to Juliet here. In part not defined in the script, but in part decided by the metteur en scène. I'm mixing a little bit the people that is managing how to play. And these kind of things are not just following some predefined rules. This may require a synchronization, and this may be done autonomously by the robot, which is quite difficult, or can be controlled remotely, and which is what happens in most of the cases in our robots on the stage. And then we may have content that is self-generated, like in improvisation. This is very, very difficult for the moment. Then we have modalities, and we may have robot actors speaking, or also social robot just speaking. It is a speaker emitting sounds. Okay, This is something. We may have only movement, which is another possibility, and this is mimic. But if we would like to have something really effective, we need to integrate voice and movement and be coherent in the movement with the voice and what we are saying. As any actor, so no, and as it's quite difficult for many robots. And finally, emotion. Managing emotion plays a relevant role for the acceptance of a social robot. And we have two aspects. One is the emotion expression. Emotion expression means that a robot should be able to express the emotion, which is a little bit easier if you have a robot that has a shape that includes some biological aspect, which is like in this case, we have eyes, we have eyebrows, we have something like that. Can be done very effectively with motion, much more than with static positions, and motion of the body that is to be coherent with everything. And motion is very delicate for the moment, for the very subtle cues that says when the emotion is true or fake. And we don't play fake things on stage. So we need a coherent multimodal expression, and we have many parameters to set, like speed, the intensity, the amplitude, the acceleration, many things. Some of these things have been modeled by Laban, which is, I think, known by many, but is one innovative dancer some years ago that tried to a little bit build a model intended to be a model for communicating how to put on the stage some ballets. But it is a model that is taken by some roboticists that as a basis to actually implement. This is what we said before. So if you remember, tell me what you would like to implement. I will do my best to implement it, but I need to know what to implement. And then the other critical aspect is emotion recognition. Emotion recognition means that we have to recognize not only what is in the face, which is maybe somehow possible if the person is just in front of the camera, which is not what happens on stage. On stage, if you have a camera on the robot is looking everywhere. It's not necessarily looking at the face of the other person. Actually, it's not. Actually, it's looking maybe often to the public. And then it's important to get cue for the real world, which is also something very difficult for the moment. We had a nice talk this summer by Rosalind Picard, the person that invented the affective computing term, professor of MIT, and she said, okay, don't trust people that is saying that they are able to recognize emotion. This is not true. This is not true at all. They recognize something, but not reliably, and we have to work a lot to recognize emotions. Here is an example of something that we have done. Oh, this sound is very high, maybe too high. So this robot is looking for people. It's just sensors of distance sensors. When it gets people, it starts moving. Yeah. If it gets people, it's happy and it's showing somehow to be happy. But if the sensors cannot detect something that looks like people, for it is just high as people, large as people, is a little bit sad. And when I showed this movie, this clip to a congress of ethologists, they said, very like a puppy. And I said, okay, let's call it puppy. Then we have autonomy. Autonomy is something that is problematic on the stage, because if the robot does something strange, then we have to manage. So usually they can be remotely driven, can be remotely sequenced, so they are able to perform their line on the script, but they are sequenced in order to keep the right timing with the script. Or they can be pre-programmed to work and can be reactive. So able to understand, for instance, when the other actor is stopping his line, and you can play your line. Or can be autonomous, and so work autonomously and take decisions. All these kind of things, the first are possible with a script. The two ones are somehow enabling improvisation. Here is an example of one of the robots that we are just a first exit of this robot. We have still to refine it. It's a robot showing some possibilities. Here we have possibilities to use this strange eyes to express something. And then we have another point that is basically important for many robots, is the possibility to move a little bit the body to accompany the things. Then this robot is mounted in a way so that is elastic, is moving elastically, and is showing a little bit of naturalness. The behaviors have to be tuned. This is just the first issue, the first it's called Robocchio because it's intended to play. The first play will be a part of Pinocchio, and this is something. It's a strange thing, as you see. Oops, sorry. It's a strange thing because appearance is also important. The shape of a robot has only few limitations and may stimulate and enable creative expression. A robot is something that has two motors, sensors and the possibility to move. At least two motors, sensors, and the possibility to move. With these limitations, we can build everything, almost everything, and we can really exploit these kind of things. Just to mention the famous Uncanny Valley, which is a position that was presented by a Japanese professor here. And this is saying, okay, at the time, 1970, we had industrial robots. We were starting thinking about humanoid robots. And then we had a lot of other possibilities. And they said, okay, here we have a human likeness, how close we are to human. And here we have how feel it familiar. Familiarity is a bad translation of a nice Japanese word, but anyway. We have this, and this is what we have. And the main point is that as soon as we go on closer to the human likeness, we have something that is familiar or we may like. But at a given moment, we go down. We go down in this uncanny valley, and we start to be afraid of something that doesn't feel natural. By rising then with something that here is mentioned as a Bunraku puppet, which is actually a puppet, but is moved by a person. And so when you move things, you move naturally like a person. So if we go to the robots that we have on stage, or we may have a social robots, let's say that let's take bio-likeness, so how much we are close to bio things in the acceptance. And we see that we have a human-like robots, like the ones built by Ishiguro, that is tending to have human-like things. quite scaring actually in many situations, mostly when they move. Then we may have a humanoids like Pepper, which is moving very well and has some characteristic of humans, but for instance is missing any facial movement, but is very much expressive anyway and well accepted in general. Then we may have bio-inspired things like Paro and bio-inspired animals. So like animals performing somehow accepted, but somehow strange. And then let's rise this curve here, because we have something like things that are biomarked. So they are object, but we can recognize something that is, for instance, something that recalls the neck or recalls the eyes. And this is very well accepted, and actually is a target of some of the robots that we have on the market for social robots. Or we may have a pure artifact that is also something quite interesting. Here is a kind of pillow, a movable pillow that we were using to study the basics of emotional expression. And actually, it was very well accepted in general, even if it is nothing with respect to bio-inspiration. It's just a pillow. Now I will go through a few inspirations that we can get from many different fields. Let me start from theater. And this is on the direction of let's take inspiration and change our mind about shapes. Chance. This is a company, a mime company, active since 50 years. They are proposing things that can be free shapes that are somehow limited, if we can say limited, by the presence that are humans inside. But if you think that you not need to have humans, you may have many more possibilities. They can be big in size. This ball is about 1.5 meters, more than 1.5 meters, and the pipe there is more than 2 meters high. Very nice and very, very, and also cheap, very cheap. So when we say we need money to have technology on stage, it depends on the kind of technology. We can also bring a technology that is really cheap. Other inspiration, puppeteers, also mentioned by Paolo. We have puppeteers of many different kinds. You see the Muppet Show, we have more traditional puppeteers with strange shapes anyway, not marionette in a classical way. We have Onraku, which is a very nice example. But we have also this kind of puppeteers. This is an actor that is performing with objects, with animals, with things, and it's moving the things as they were interacting with him. And this show, it was just, let's say, having a relationship with this alien, which is very, very nice. What we can learn from puppeteers? We can learn, they are limited by human presence, okay, but you see that the limitation is somehow can be considered. And we can learn that they drive the things from the outside. So there are things outside, can be wires, it can be arms, it can be hands, it can be the body that is driving something that is effective, and it's very effective. This show was amazing. Then theater, you mainly know many things of theater. I was let's say surprised by this version of Hamlet, where at a given moment a drone was entering, playing the Phantom of Hamlet, and was, let's say, not a classical, but a classical piece, but not a classical mise en scène, not a classical representation, but a drone was there and was completely fitting the situation. We have, for instance, a Rimini protocol, where we have a static, more or less a static robot that is talking about robots. We have the work of Ishiguro and Orisa, okay, and this is also another surprise I had. This is a theater that is very physical theater, and at a given moment, a simple car, remotely driven, was fitted with this kind of strange things, was playing on stage, and very effectively played the role of the brother of this main character, and very effectively was interacting with the person. I like very much Mastrella as a scenograph. And then we have something more, let's say, humanoid, like a robotic spin that is playing professionally. Some inspiration also from dance. Here is arms that are moving and making sounds, some effects just by lasers. It's a possibility. We have seen mobile screens, we have seen lasers, we have seen many different kinds of things done by arms. But here, the same robot is using to dance, and finally use it to dance really. So other representation with this robot were not so much effective. They were is still an industrial robot, but here is playing with expression. So they finally decided to put expression in an industrial robot. You all have seen this movie from Boston Dynamics, very, very nice. And we see many possibilities with these fantastic robots, but also with robots that are, I like very much the dance step that takes this spot. As small things is relatively easy, small things are very much effective. Then we have the massive possibility of programming robots to do the same things. Here, 1,000 robots dancing, let's say dancing the same thing. Let's think, for instance, at having a robot and a doppelgang on stage, doppelgang on stage. And this is one of the best things that I've seen, is dancing between a dancer and two drones. They were fantastically driven. They were very nice at driving these drones around, very emotional. It's a story about a relationship between a person and something, a lover, and then there was another one that was the former lover of this one. So that's something that you can understand just by moving on a nice music. And then the last inspiration comes from art. Art, here we have also famous things quite scaring that are around, showing the movement. Movement is important here, and getting also nice, let's say, movement and kind of a movement. Here this is a puppet actually. And we have something strange. It's the spray paint dress. So there was a model that was more or less dancing, but more or less facing I would feel uneasy in that situation, while robots were spraying her dress, and the dress became a unique stuff that could be on stage. This is something that was presented at the Biennale last year, a robot that is trying to clean this blood. And while it's cleaning the blood very effectively, the blood is going in the other side. So it's something very effective. With a small movement, very simple movement again. And here we have a couple of experience of interacting robots made by Sony in Milan at Fuorisalone. Fuorisalone is a moment where we had 1 million people around for the city looking at the design stuff. And here we had balls, some balls that were aggregating around people, slowly showing to like to have a kind of interaction, but being a little bit afraid. And just by the movement of something that is nothing more than a ball. And on the other side, we had something very problematic, which was an arm that was trying to have an interaction with people, but there were a lot of people. So it was very difficult. And this is a challenge for sensors, very difficult to understand to who dedicate attention. And this is another thing that we have to think. Then let's go to the final challenge. Improv is something really challenging. Really challenging because a robot should be able to improvise with human actors, which means to get a topic from a public. This is the typical improvisation setting. You get a topic, so you don't know anything about what you have to put on stage. You have to propose. You have to play a game that is called yes and. So you have to understand what the other people on stage are doing by gesture and voice, often without any object. So they are mimicking objects. And propose situation at the show pace. So you should keep the rhythm, which is not at all something easy. We have started this now, for the moment, without thinking about voice and understanding voice, but trying to work with the gesture, which is now possible with the tools that are coming out and the technology that is coming out that is making possible to understand somehow with some reliability, but it is on the game, how people are moving, how people are, the gestures that we try to understand what kind of gesture they are doing. So it's possible to start to have something reacting to gestures. Final slide for a dignity of robotness. This is just the last main point. Let's start for the top of universe. Some very old people may recognize this name, which was the top of the tree of knowledge in the early years of AI. And we have minerals, vegetables, animals, and then mammals and humans, but we also have artifacts. And if they are animated, we have robots. And these have some dignity. And when we are on stage, a robot should be considered as a robot. A robot that is playing the role of a human is something that is fake. So please, let's have robots doing robots and not humans. So in conclusions, robots offer a lot of possibility for creative interaction, which can now be exploited even at a relatively low cost and complexity. Keep it simple. Somebody said, keep it simple. It's a very basic statement for designers. We all know very well. The challenge for theater people, actors, the directors, script writers, set designers will be to find ways to work effectively with their artificial companions. So this is a possibility, an expressive possibility to do this kind of things. This is one of our robots also. This. Let's say, since Paolo set up a dream, I left one slide just for my dream. I can also tell you my dream, my strange dream is this one. When I was in Hakone in Japan and I saw this giant network and people running around this network, I said, how would be nice to have this network not just there, but being interactive, and so having things that are reacting to people, and maybe a story to tell people while they are moving around, a kind of a distributed theater in a very nice setting. Okay, thank you. I'm here for questions. I don't know what time, but yeah, more or less.
Yeah, more or less. We are late, but
we are late, but we are late.
Yeah, well, whatever. So thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. As usually, I really am astonished about the designs of our robots. Sometimes I feel you are more like kind of Jetpack, you know.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I really, really enjoy. You know, it's interesting because before we had a question about like the role of the people coming from social and human sciences. Actually, I would like to, since you talked about scripts and this stuff, you know, I would like to ask you the same question from my point of view as a computer scientist. A computer scientist in some way fascinated by cognitive sciences and so on. So you said that one side we have scripted behaviors, maybe mediated by, without an explicit reasoning, so maybe mediated by teleoperation, like Wizard of Oz, no? And the other side, you talked about improvisation, but I think those are two extremes. And so I would like to have your point of view. I mean, I think there is a space in the middle. There's a space for, that is a space, also a space for research on cognitive autonomous behaviors, and also an opportunity for cognitive sciences. So I would like to know your point of view on this. And then if others want to interact, want to ask questions, just raise hand, please.
Yeah, of course, there is an intermediate point. For instance, we developed a couple of years ago. We developed an architecture to keep count of the kind of aspects that can make a robot behaving in a given way on stage. For instance, the social relationships among the characters, the actual actions performed by the other characters, and so in order to decide how to play in the next line, so how to be scared or happy or angry in playing the next line. So I know that I have to play a line, but how this line should be played depends on the context, which is a very important aspect to be perceived cognitively. And we did some experiments by some scene of Shakespeare or some scenes of Pirandello that were actually well modeled by a model that could take into account all these kind of things. That are the aspects that then are needed when you have a social robot. So if you really have a social robot around, not just a prop that is going around checking if you are not falling and things like that, but a robot that could actually interact. This robot should be able to understand what you need at a given moment, to understand what you expect from the robot at a given moment. And this depends on many aspects, including the social relationships, including the memory of the past, recent past, past, more far away past. So many things that should be considered. And this is a space for cognitive modeling, I believe, because it's something that is needed also outside the theater, but it's something that would give some possibilities to express better without programming the robot actor, so the robot actor that is playing. And okay, so this is nice for let's say traditional theater. Let's imagine how nice it could be for a theater where you have strange objects around. all the Mummenschan's work is based on something that could be expressed even without words, just by moving and deciding what to do and how to do that.
I think we should find a word for this, because we used to say things, so these objects, these things, but we don't have a word, no? I think we should find a word.
Yeah, it could be, I don't know, theatrical objects or theatrical something, I don't know. For other objects that we are developing, for instance, we have a trash bin, we have a hanger, we have things like that. We call them smart objects or intelligent objects. They are actually interacting with people, but they are objects. We can have smart props or smart. I don't know. Let's find a better name. This may be a challenge for everybody. So that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if there are questions in the crowd. People, we are here for interacting, so.
Maybe I can ask a question. Andrea, I think, thank you very much. Very, very, very interesting presentation. One point that I'd like to ask you, but actually everybody, because it's based on my own experience of this test, is that we have, I think, of course, it's a collaboration between roboticists to make robots that are reliable, performant, and so on, but also about artists and theater makers, as you say, because the real challenge is to design an entirely new kind of representation of theater. In a sense, it's like the change from the Greek theater with the masks, you know, or the no theater. So we are is a revolution, and we have to compete with the special effects in movie. Because many people, in fact, your point about theater that is real, very well done, but many people, including children, what we noticed in our experience is that even children tend to be frustrated in a little bit between what they see and what they have seen with the cartoon or videos, you know, because essentially now it is possible to create special effects that are wow effect. So what is the theater really? The challenge is for theater. Of course, the challenge is also for us. So for example, in my opinion, what is very, very important is scripts. Scripts that take full advantage of the robot, that are impressive, and of course also take consider the limitations of current robots. No? That is a limitation, like cell phones were a different generation just 10 years ago. So it is clear that technology is evolving. So how to take advantage and create the magic of theater with robots that are clearly inferior to humans.
Yeah, they're different. I would not say inferior. So they are there was in the, let's say, literature about disability. There is a quote that is attributed to Einstein that says, if you measure the ability of people, you have to consider the ability of people. So if you measure the ability of a fish to climbing a tree, you will feel that it is really dumb, it is not able to do that. But a fish is able to do different things. So this is something that is also true for robots. If we have robots that are trying to be humans, of course they are very limited. And we can have scripts that are taking into account this and have a very interesting possibilities to consider a robot that is trying to be a human. But we may have also many things that, as you said, could be completely innovative when we consider robots not just mimicking humans, but being robots, being objects, being strange things that may happen. On stage can happen many interesting things. When you say, okay, there are many possibilities to have things on the screen, yes, true. What we see with people with disability, you can play more or less the same game on the screen or on a physical object that they can touch, they can listen, they can hear the motors moving. This is something completely different. When you see a movie of a drone that is performing something in front of you, or when you feel the air of the drone that is coming on your face, this is completely different effect, completely different effect. And this is one of the points that can be interesting. It's an open point because it's up to the script writers
Andrea,
to
if I
exploit
can
this kind
please,
of thing, scenographs, everybody. So everybody.
yeah, but I understand your point. But if I can be very frank, talking to theater people, I find most of the robotic performance very boring.
Yes, because
and
nowadays
not
they are
only
going...
me. Actually, I convinced an organizer, Stephen Petcholi, to have a robot performance in a theater, open space theater. And I'm afraid I don't mention the company, but it was almost a disaster as compared to other human treatments. So we have to be objective. Because obviously, I agree with the similarity with disabled people and so on. But, you know, without entering in details, people go to theater to be surprised, impressed. You know, it's a different expectation.
This is the point. So maybe most of the theater representation now are oriented in exploring this idea of the robot and the ethics with the robot and what we can do with the robot and many of these kind of things. And this may be interesting for someone, but may be boring for the big public. Is not such interesting. But if you have something like for instance, so also the spray dress, sprayed dress. If you look at that kind of things, even looking at that on the screen is just emotionally hard. Then being there and seeing this model being sprayed, it's something that is very, very strong. And I think that there are possibilities to do this kind of things with robots, which add possibilities to theaters. No, it's not something that is. It's something. It's just a novel dimension for novel things. But I agree with you. People will go there for amusing, for engaging, for having some emotional feedback or some emotional action. And we have to work on these kind of things. We have to work on these kind of things. Surprising. I was very much emotional, for instance, being at one of the finals for the Mummenschanz, when at a given moment you feel a big noise and a face as big as the whole scenario is going on the people on there. This is something that is not possible with actors. It's emotionally strong, and you remember this as the snowstorm of a Slava snow show at the end. So at the end you don't expect, and you feel completely filled in a snowstorm of
maybe on this question, Izabella, our third speaker, can
I imagine, yes,
her point of view. And I don't know, we are really late, so I don't know. I would like to ask.
Really late.
Yeah, maybe we can skip the pause. I don't know. Erika, help me. Maybe we can just skip the pause and
Yes,
continue.
I think it should be better if we skip the pause and just go the marathon. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. So I go.
Okay, please.
Isabella,
thank you
is it
both.
right
Thank
for
you,
you?
everybody.
So
Yes,
it's
yes.
I can see. Okay. Okay, it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Izabella Pluta, qui est au laboratoire de culture et humanité numérique de l'Université de Lausanne. And Dr. Pluta on digital technologies in theater, as well as on acting and directing. Very right person for us to open the webinar, also because she is the leading organizer of the International Symposium Limits of the Human Machines Without Limits, Contemporary Stage and Robotics, Exchanges and Collaborations, which will take place in Lausanne in October 2021. So, and she's gathering an international community of scholars around this subject, organizing this big conference. So I will let her speak now and listen to her, and I think we will go in, we will deepen our approach to theater, robotics in theater from an historical point of view and with a specific case study in her contribution. So thank you, Isabella. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation for this fascinating webinar. Tell me just if, do you see my PowerPoint?
No.
Okay.
Isabelle, tu dois partager l'écran. Voilà, super.
So you see
Now,
it now?
Yes,
Okay.
now it's perfect.
Okay, very good. So my talk is dedicated, as you said, Erika, to robots in theater, and especially to androids on contemporary stage. And we know that robot has the beautiful story in the history of theater, of course. Let me mention a few examples. Heinrich von Kleist, Gordon Craig reflect on the puppet as an ideal and metaphor for theater and acting, combined with the question whether puppets are better actors than humans, since they are free of human weakness such as vanity and thus better suited for a theater of the future. And in 1913, the futuristic Russian opera entitled Victory Over the Sun by Malevich, Khrushchev, and Matyushin, for example, shows actors wearing masks and performing the geometrical movements. The play explores the question of a rebirth in the form of a prosthetic body powered by solar energy. And the word robot, as you know, appears in Karl Čapek's science fiction play under the acronym EUR, the name of the production company, which means Rossum's Universal Robots. And after, in 1939, that the first real presentation of a robot took place. It was Electro the Motorman and his mechanical dog Sparko. This shiny golden humanoid robot was presented in New York as part of the World's Fair exhibition. But let's move to the contemporary stage, and a few questions could be formulated here. The first one could be like this: how does the relationship unfold between theater and robotics? Robotics is an important part of the digitalization process of contemporary theater. Today, it is complex activity with various aesthetics and robotics devices. In the field of theater, robotic theater has not yet homogenized its study and exploration object, where the robotic element appears in the following ways. We can see 4 very general levels of this creative activity with robots. For example, robotics constructions, a robot arm, for example, indirect or indirect interaction with the actor, or robotic construction in direct or indirect interaction with the audience who became an actor. Robotic non-human actors in the situation of performance, and humanoid robot alongside actors, which is our subject today. Let's see you these excerpts of Louis-Philippe Demer's Blind Robots without sounds, but I think it's absolutely comprehensive as an example. Richard Schickner pointed out already in 1979 that the emergence of performance art was connected to what he already called the end of humanism. In fact, posthumanism and transhumanism arrive at the stage and triggers first shocks. While posthumanism often is based on the assumption that humans may be replaced by machines, there are also 2 more possibilities. The first one, mixing and blending human and machine in bionic being or cyborgs. And the second one, entering a relationship of collaboration. And transhumanism aims even more at the increase and improvement of the human being outside of reparative medicine. The next important question could be formulated here. How can we define this type of performance? Are there any definitions of it? The relationship of contemporary theater with robotics engineering is defined today in several areas of this artistic endeavor. A number of more precise definitions strive to capture in several areas in this artistic experimentation. In 207, Steve Dixon talks in his important book Digital Performance about robotic theater, performing forms including robots, cyborg theater. The actor or performer is rigid with a device or prosthetics he wears and can manipulate, and metal performance with robots and cyborgs. This kind of work can be read as a camp because they perform the artifice in imperfect and natural calculated motion. They created a world of robots. In Dixon's terms, metal camp. And Jennifer Parker Starbuck, in her book Cyborg Theater, explains also, I quote, cyborg theater finds itself in a cultural context that is programmed to envision human-machine encounters as problematic and dangerous, end of quote. She interprets this as a sign of fear, the fear of not being good enough, not being apt for the future, and of being replaced by a better species. Nowadays, theater and performing arts artists who work with robotics are relatively numerous, and they could be involved in the important scientific research, or they do experimental work. They work theater concepts or propose new forms. Let me see some examples. The artistic situation when robotics collaborates with theater and integrates the idea of puppets theater. And here I choose two examples, very famous examples. The real pioneer of this innovation is Sant'Anna with his electronic puppet, and Canadian artists, Denis Marlot and Stéphanie Jasmin, who work with mechanic puppets, dummies, but also video projections. Another example is non-anthropomorphic robots. It could be a robotic installation, robotic arms, even drones. And here you see the example of ArTeC, which was the installation performance without human actors of Joris Mathieu. And again, Philippe Louis Demers with his L'Assemblée, and it was really a robotic universe when spectators could enter. But also we have the example of choreography, and French choreographer and artist Aurélien Bory with his very interesting work Sans Objet, without object. And this French artist integrate in this performance, in this dance, the industrial arm simply. After, we have also the examples of the prosthetics in theater. Robotic elements wearing that actors could wear and manipulate. And Marcelien Tunes-Rocard, who is also a pioneer of this kind of approach with his Episou, a performance in which he debated the figure of the cyborg. And the young artist Ezra with Organic Orchestra, this group worked with voice and the interactive gloves. After, we have this kind of robot which are very interesting for us for theater, androids, and I choose two examples of Urza Hirata Metamorphose and Gob Squat My Square Lady, which is the opera with these humanoid robots. Of course, dance is also very interested in this solution, and here you have the example of the choreography robot of Blancali. And an example of this theater of robots, of this universe of robot camp that Steve Dixon says in this very, very famous work of Chico McMurtry, Amorphic Landscape, with all kinds of robots and constructions for the audience. But there are also performances and work which refers to the idea of the robotics and robotic body, but which do not put these devices on stage. They work it in a metaphorical and symbolic way. And I choose the example of Angela Goch, the Uncanny Valley girl, where this artist worked the various ideas of robotics. Robots on contemporary stage today takes various forms and types of collaborations. Creations are more and more numerous, and in theater, the issue of the robot appears to be moving today from operating in singing sittings and as a part of the device towards more interaction with the actors and finally autonomous actor. The point is then to ask questions especially related to presence, improvisation, unpredictability, and bugs, leading to one of the most fundamental questions in drama, acting on stage, how to act with robots. And I would like to dwell a little on the presence. The following questions can be formulated here. How does it influence the presence of the actors on the stage when they play with the robots? How do we perceive the robots? The android on stage raises elementary questions about the concept of presence, liveness, and introduces the idea of the Uncanny Valley as defined by Masashiro Mori. In theater, presence is the key concept, and it has been discussed in the field of theater studies since the 90s. According to Erika Fischer-Lichte, presence is no longer seen as a quality of the performer, but as something that emerges in the interaction between spectators and performers. She distinguishes a weak concept of presence from a strong concept of presence. The weak concept of presence is defined as being there, before the gaze of another, while the strong concept is more active and describes the actor's ability to occupy and command space and to attract the spectators' undivided attention. Of course, we can remind this famous discussion of Peggy Phelan and Philip Auslander in the end of 19th, when Auslander defines the concept of liveness in the mediatization and in the concept of mediatization culture. And Peggy Phelan defended the non-reproducibility of live performance. I would like to underline that Philip Auslander debates this question of liveness after in 2002 with Herbert Blau, and in 2010 he reworked his concept of liveness in order to apply better to new forms of interactivity between humans and digital entities. So you have here this quotation, I quote, "It may be that we are now at a point in history at which liveness can no longer be defined in terms of either the presence of living human beings before each other or physical and temporal relationships. The emerging definition of liveness may be built primarily around the audience's effective experience, to the extent that websites and other virtual entities respond to us in real time. They feel live to us, and this may be the kind of liveness we now value." End of quotation. In Auslander's view, liveness is only manifest in the experience of a contemporary audience, being familiar with the current state of technical development. Of course, after we have this concept of Uncanny Valley, defined by Masashiro Mori in the 17th, and for him it is this discomfort we can feel when we're faced with an android robot. We recognize echoes, of course, of the inquiétante étrangeté that Freud spoke of at the beginning of the 20th century. In general terms, robots influence 4 types of relation in theater. The first one, the relation between human actors. The second one, the relation between viewers and performers. The third one, the relation of non-human actors to one another. The fourth one, the relation between human and non-human actors. Each sphere is defined by different modes of interaction that encompass play, interpretation, and identity, as well as its destabilization. One thesis is that actors and audience members experience the becoming order of their own bodies in their encounters with non-human agents, because prosthetics, implants, and robots are controlled by programs that do not follow the rules of human sovereignty and freedom. In this way, we have fundamental questions of embodiment and disembodiment, subjectivity and agency, and the affirmation or rejection of non-human alteration to the body. Following question can be formulated in this context. Can a robot act on the stage just like a human actor? Or does it just move around? How can we describe interactions between audience and robot, particularly when audience members ascribe intentions to robots who clearly have none? What does participation mean here? Does it encompass technical and non-technical, human and non-human actors? Or is it participation a concept that can only be used to describe human action? Several theater directors and choreographers ask these questions and try to find answers. Let's see some famous examples of performance. And next few questions could be formulated here. How do artists integrate androids into performance? What questions should they ask themselves about the creative process, about working with engineers, how they direct the actors in the action and the interaction with androids? The first examples of this integration of humanoid and robots in theater is the performance Sure Thing with the robot Herb. In 2014, the Personal Robotics Lab of Carnegie Mellon University collaborated with the School of Drama in Pittsburgh to integrate the robot Herb into David Eves' Sure Thing. The robot assumed the role of an actor and was controlled live on stage by a human, also visible to the audience. The collaboration between engineers, theater director, and actors was in the center of this project. And some of the technical tools were developed, for example, a bidirectional blender interface for robot animation. Another example that we could already see today is the Spilikin A Love Story with robot Thespian, and it was integrated in the Pipeline Theatre production in 2015. A robot also plays a robot. All stage activities are pre-programmed and controlled by a computer in the backstage here. The timing can be modified by a human, but otherwise all actions are determined. The play develops around the relationship between Sally, a woman in her 60s suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and a humanoid robot named Spilikin 5 who assists her through the play. Another example, My Square Lady, which was an opera in 2015 at the Komische Oper de Berlin, with the robot Mayan. And this robot represents here a kind of transition between staged and interactive theater. Her response to the live situation, but the overall dramaturgy is fixed. This works mainly because Mayan is relatively passive. It is a humanoid robot who specializes in autonomous learning. This means that the robot is not remotely controlled or directed by predetermined algorithms. The task of the opera staff was thus to make their engagement with Mayan emotionally, capturing enough for the robot to focus its attention on them. And also this interesting example of the Uncanny Valley signed by Stefan Kegi and Rimini Protocol in 2018. With Android, which is the copy of German writer Thomas Melle, the robot replaces the writer and gives a lecture. So the lecture is the performance. Its status on stage is ambiguous. He has a very disturbing connection with Melle because he really looks like the writer. But as a machine, it is put into question, into mise en abîme, because we can see the wearing of his open skull behind him. The android is an exact copy of Melle's body, which lends her voice in the German version. In the performance, the writer talks about this experience in different labs when measures were taken from his body, when the mask is done from his face. And the last examples, I know that this collaboration will be analyzed in the next webinar. So just a few words about this very, very well-known collaboration. So I mean, it's the work done by Japanese duo, director and writer Oriza Hirata and engineer Hiroshi Ishiguro. Ishiguro, as you know, certainly is known for this development with his team of androids. The most fascinating are the Geminoids designed in the image of actually existing people. Ishiguro is interested in the action of his robots in other contexts than scientific. Thus, the robot actor project defined by Zaven-Pare was born, in which the stage becomes a new laboratory for robot study, a place of experimentation. Ishiguro proposed the collaboration to Hirata in 2008 when he produced a 20-minute performance that he wrote, I Am a Worker, with 2 actors and 2 household robots of the Wakamaru type. Since this assimilation of robots into this show, which was a success, Ishiguro rapidly proposed an even more difficult test to Hirata to work with Geminoid F. And so this is the performance that you see, I Am a Worker, and Geminoid F, that is the female version of Geminoid. Hirata faced sample and also very, very complex questions, technical, logistical, artistic. For example, what play to choose, taking into account the lack of the robots, because he has his mobility, he couldn't walk simply. What could be the integration of the android into the scenography? Whether to hide or show the wearing, the speaker, the chair on which it sits. After, also the dubbing work, because this robot, this android has the dubbing voices of another actress. or to simply directing the performance with actors, with robots on the stage. Maybe to teach the actors how to deal with the unexpected arising from some operational defect in the android, such as breakdown. And finally, the organization of the creative process between the artistic team and the laboratory. I mean, communication, sharing the steps of staging and robot control integration in the production. So Oriza Hirata elaborated a performance, Sayonara, in 2010. After 2012, he presented Sayonara version 2, and in the same year, Chekhov's Three Sisters. And in 2014, another performance, Metamorphosis Android version, a production inspired by Franz Kafka texts. So I can arrive to my conclusion. Android in theater raises several questions that concern not only its perception by the audience, but also solutions related to its integration. Artists wish to go beyond its action, which can be summed up in the movement on stage and the gesture. They would like to go further in the more and more nuanced interaction with the human actor into the improvisation. This is still at an experimental stage, and each artist seems to develop his own tricks and solutions. Nevertheless, the field of exploration is wide open, even if working with an android can be still a very expensive project. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Izabella, for this panorama of the theater contemporary creation, the state of the art, and this focus on androids. And I think it was really interesting to because the resonances between the three talks. In particular, I was, and I would like to share with you a thought and to ask you to your point on this thought that I have. I found this. It was really interesting for me to hear the conclusion of Professor Bonarini about the way the challenge for theater creators, theater artists, to find a way to use robots on stage, and this resonates with your presentation and the fact that often artists who decide to use robots on stage embrace post-humanism or transhumanism philosophical approach, a vision of a kind of threat that robots constitutes. And I think Professor Bonarini was saying robots have to find their dramaturgical role. They are robots, and it seems that in theater now they have this disrupting role to introduce some non-human presence and to make us view a very dark future in some way. What do you think about this link, maybe I'm wrong and it's just an impression, but this link between dramaturgical choices and the kind of robots that are used and then the kind of collaboration that are put in place. I don't know if it's clear, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Of course, artist is free to choose his own aesthetics and to choose robot or not. I think personally that the rise, the development of this kind of philosophy of post-humanism and transhumanism is a kind of accelerator of this integration of different robots to the arts in general. And if I remembered well, we could hear in the first presentation that there is a difference between the perception of robots in Asian culture and in the European culture, and it's also very important because even in the science fiction literature in Europe, robot was the status of danger for the humanity, and yes, a lot of writers presented the end of the world with machines, with human, which is the just a part of this world. And in Japanese culture, for example, robots are seen as heroes, as friends of people. So this difference is also important, I think. And I think also that all these elements, and I am very happy to hear the two other presentations that were really interdisciplinary, that different elements from different fields can dialogue and can really accelerate some ideas, because a lot of ideas was also in the science fiction concepts, for example. So maybe this vision of the end of world, what we can also see in theater, will be transgressed, will be transformed into something more positive or more perspective as a possibility for human. And I think theater is a good place for initiate and debate for this, because it is still in the symbolic and metaphorical way. That is the specificity of theater.
Thank you. I don't know if there are questions for Izabella in a specific way, or no? I don't see, because I'm not very... Yes, Pedro Torres, please.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know. Ah, ok, on attend. Okay. Pardon, je mets...
Okay. That was a question that came to me in the end of the exposition of the Professor Bonarini, and then I put to you this because I have an observation that I made sometimes when the robots are on the stage. I have the impression that they are used somehow to underline the human questions. I don't know if I explained, and they came every time as a kind of contradictory between machine and human, and somehow it's used to potentialize it, maybe that the word, the human questions or the human feelings, or and then sometimes I ask, what it's how can we think about a robot theater? I mean, how a robot can be used on the stage for what he is, for or considering also all the limits that we have in the robots, in the machine on stage, but in utility, for example, in the a piece just with robots, for example, or just one robot without any human presence on the stage, and then try to use the robots for what they are, in the sense what's the potentialities of the machine as on the stage, without being a kind of underlined for human questions. I don't know if it's clear.
But this is the question for me.
Oui, yes.
Okay.
Or for you or for Mr. Bonarini. It's just that in the end of the exposition of Professor Bonarini, it came from me, and then I wait to do, and then I pose to you because I think it's interesting.
That's the. I think the theater has this strong potential to discuss not only the functioning of robots and to how we can integrate them to the performance, but also to go on metaphorical levels. So robots, for example, as you underlined, could be a pretext or could be an opportunity to discuss the limits, and also to discuss the limits of the human, and yes, to situate it, the audience in the position without answers. That's the we can see this solution in a lot of performances, that the audience is situated in the position, yeah, it's to audience, to choice, to answer the questions. So yes, I think theater is the better place for raise different questions and to stimulate the audience.
If I can say 2 words, I would say I completely agree with Izabella. A lot of interesting things come from theater, and when I leave theater with a open question and reflection, I'm happy, and that's fine. But it's also true that it would be nice if this comes also together with something more, which is in the direction of Paolo, Dario, that was saying before. So I would like also to be surprised. I would like to be somehow involved by something that is motivating the fact that I'm there, and not just reading a paper or reading a book or many other things. So it will be important to exploit robots not only as question risers, or maybe as a question risers, but with a spirit that is. I come again to movement chance. When you go out from a movement chance show, you have questions in your mind and you think about relationships, but you have seen objects showing this kind of things, and you have seen something that is also visually interesting, also interesting from the aesthetical part. And this is something that in some theater with robots is still missing. So one of the problems is maybe that we are relying on a complex technology. So in those things, we are working with robots. Geminoid has tens of motors just for the face, but then it's not moving. So we expect that it's moving somehow. We can put it on a wheelchair like a Robotespian, but it's something that, of course, makes everything more related to what the robot is saying than what the robot is doing. If you think there are other interesting aspects where you have robots running around in the scene, and maybe just a small robot playing a role of a small animal, somehow introducing something in the world. There are roles that the robots can have that can still open questions, but can also be aesthetically relevant, aesthetically significant. And also, so for instance, the spraying robot, they are obviously too violent and too, so they pose questions. And they're there, and that kind of things can be done with an industrial robot, but can be done also with a couple of motors driven by Arduino, and that's more or less the same effect. Apart the sound that for an industrial robot is much more effective in presence.
Maybe I have just to go further, and then I will share the word, the floor. I don't know how to say it, the microphone. Maybe there is a question of the imaginary, as in a kind of way. It seems that the artist's imaginary is fixed on a certain kind of robot with a certain appearances and certain features, and this does not allow to imagine different kind of robots, so there is this question of imaginary. And I was thinking about the experience Professor Dario was talking about, Roborama, that maybe theater for young people is a fresh opportunity to explore these different forms of robotic creatures, because we are freer from produce questions, meanings, and we can allow us more fantasy, more aesthetic pleasure. I don't know, find this is a reflection, an observation. And the other one I was thinking about, it's the question, so the imaginary on one side, and on the other side, the collaborations. It's really, Izabella works a lot on this problem, but to imagine the different robot, an artist should also find the right laboratory. I think that if there are artists here looking at your robots today, they should be amazed and say, yes, let's try to do something with this. And but I mean, you also have maybe the artist has some requests, some ideas, but then he has to engage a discussion with the right lab. I don't know how to say it, but okay. And I open this to a discussion. If you want to answer, Izabella, Andrea, Professor Bonarini, Professor Dario, and the audience as well.
Sorry, just about the audience, because we have many interesting people that also can participate. So it was supposed to have a small discussion. So just random, I can see Giulio Sandini here, or Antonio Camurri that we will see in the next webinar. There is also Zaven Pare. So if you would please join the discussion, and because I would like to
Salvatore,
your
there
point
is
of
a question on the...
And there is also a question, yeah.
But you can bank.
Yeah, yeah. Yuchen, if you want to take, if you want, you can pose yourself the question as you wish. Sorry, Isabella, I don't know if, I didn't want to cut anyone.
No, I think it's a good idea if the audience could participate actively, especially the very famous people that we have here. So.
Well, if I can say, actually, I believe that the question asked by Yuchen Peng is really fundamental. So if you really read in the chat, is a PhD student, and he is asking if, given the current situation, it is tolerable to be more forward-looking, conceptual and hypothetical in artistic research in this case. And I think this is, in fact, a very fundamental question that is being asked by a student who is working on this. So it's a responsibility also for us. Okay, what I could say is that in engineering, we use the concept of TRL, technology readiness level, very much to measure the level of maturity of a technology. TRL 0 or 1 is the idea. TRL 9 is the market. You can find. And it is now commonly used by the European Commission, for example, to identify different levels for funding. So the point is, where is the robotic theater in this scale? And where it is going to stay? Because one could say, well, okay, it will stay in the phase of just what is called in Italian, experimental theater. It is small theaters with a few very sophisticated people looking, and the audience that is limited by itself because it's, again, the kind of performance is very, sophisticated. Or we want to move towards the real theater with a general audience. So what I mentioned for the case of the Roborama, for the puppet robot, is an attempt of moving toward the real popular case. Because to my knowledge, by the way, I don't want to be, to pretend this, but to my knowledge, it's the only case in the world where a robot show has been presented to very wide audience with a regular, like a real theater, if you will. Okay? So every week for 3 or 4 months and so on, and measuring the results. Now I say, as I said, the limitations are that, one, the limitation is in robotics, because robotics is expected. Some people have an expectation of robots being better than humans in terms of performance. Okay, so to be surprised by the quality of the performance, and from this point of view, the feedback is in fact quite frustrating, because actually robots may not do this. And the other point is about the interest of the story that is based on the intelligence and emotion that actors, human actors, can transmit, and the robot cannot do that at all. Actually, so what is the kind of script? What is the kind of message? So my question, the answer to the student is if this is, we can well say that this is a research activity, like a TRL 0, 1, 2, 3, very fundamental, like gravitational waves for physicists. Okay? And this is something that may come in the future. And so it's a small team of researchers who are investigating the essence of what making theater with the robots, with the present robot can be. Probably the field is still immature to go to stage in wider environment. Or we can say, because things are making progresses, I presented the case of collaborative robots essentially kicking humans safely. This is kind of wow effect. Or you can see the Boston Dynamics robot, the one, both the dog and the humanoid, they cost pretty much, but they of course can be just rented, for example, and they are not intelligent at all. In fact, actually most of them are teleoperated, or drones that create, I would say, emotion from, but what is the content? So we are missing the part with the intelligence and emotion. So this is why in our case of Roborama, we used both humans and robots, that in fact is in most cases. So the humans help to create emotions, to transmit emotion. Again, I'm not an expert. I apologize for maybe the naivety of some considerations I'm doing, but I try also to be on the part of the audience, not only the part.
If I can say, it's I think that if we expect that a robot has a performance like a human, of course we are quite far away, very far away. But if you consider a robot as a mean to provide an artistic expression, it's only a question to explore the thing. So imagine how a piece of wood or a piece of whatever can be used as artistic expression. A robot is much more. So it's a question of thinking about this kind of things. Interacting, so having artists, let's say artists in general, interacting with engineers, it's a very nice experience, because artists usually came, I'm working with some of them, usually came with ideas, a big expectation. I would like a robot able to learn for everything and do whatever artistic. Yes, fine. Then we have to work together to find a way to have something that is interesting from the artistic point of view and possible from the technological point of view. And often it's also a question, so there is this design approach, which is keep it simple, keep it simple. Often keeping the things simple but effective is something that brings to the possibility to have robotic things on the stage that cost 100th of an industrial robot, maybe as effective or differently effective, of course. But they convey different kind of things. So if you have a big robot just moving, wow, 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 that's an effect, fine. If I have a humanoid, there's another effect, as possible. If you have a small thing moving a net, there's another effect, it's possible. What the importance for the artist is to exploit this possibility. So is that possible? And given that, maybe it's possible to have a different kind of theater that can rise the interest in people, because they are looking, for instance, the possibility to have emotions, to be surprised by what happens on the stage, which is much more surprising than many usual, let's say, theater stuff. Of course, content is important too, and it's not just a surprise. So put together things. It's not an easy task. It's new things. In this conception, I agree with Paolo. We are TRL 0, 1 or something like that. So it's a question of changing the conception. From the technological point of view, we know the limits and we know what is possible to do, and we can use what is possible to do instead of then trying to do much more, because much more is not reliable enough, it's not possible, it's not cheap enough to be used.
Hello, if I may say hello, my name is Antonio Camurri. So first, thank you very much for the very interesting presentations and discussions. So it's a pleasure to meet and to have the occasion to know about more about these works, interesting research. I've seen that just have two concepts that I would propose and maybe have some reaction. The first is that there is the more focus on the robot in the theater from the perspective of so in other words, the relation between the artist and the scientist that was also discussed now is very let's say delicate and complex. So we in our center in the next meeting I'll try to present our experience. We worked with Luciano Berio and various artists and dancers and dance companies. The usual request that technologists receive from artists is that a sort of a service. Like, so I wish this machine with this idea is like a sound service or a lighting service, but more sophisticated. And that is not interesting at all for us, such kind of requests. Instead, I think that the bidirectional communication and transdisciplinary approach is the most interesting for us and the reason for our existence. We are a center of the University of Genova on the intersection of art and science and technology, in which also robots came. I'm not an expert in robotics, but I had experience also with this, also with some colleagues. And so the aspect that Andrea mentioned, and also is Laban. Laban is a source of inspiration for us since more than 20 years about how to model, to develop computational models of human movement and to analyze and to understand human expressivity. And I wonder, maybe a focus could be in this theater and science and technology direction could be in understanding and transfer something like to Laban, but from the theater disciplines and long-standing theories, how to exploit these and to do a process of transdisciplinary process in which try to transfer some theoretical approach into the computer science, for example, of human-computer interaction field, like in luthery, in music that is a century tradition of centuries, is transferred to the human-computer interaction for novel interfaces, for human-computer interaction, because it's a young discipline, human-computer interaction. It can get inspiration from luthery, that has hundreds of years of experience since very ancient times. The same theater, there has been some tradition from Brenda Laurel at the beginning of the 90s about the Greek tragedy as a way to inspire software engineering development process. But I think that there is a big potential of getting inspiration for us as scientists or engineers to improve the human-robot interaction, the human-computer interaction, the way to develop innovation by taking this this knowledge and the theory open and as a source of inspiration for us. So this is just a question that I pose. I'm convinced about this, but I wonder if this is something that is shared. Thank you.
I don't know if there's someone that wants to respond.
It can remain as a comment, since I think that we are beyond the time.
I think that's okay. We can only agree about this kind of things. So of course, the interaction is something that is important. So it's not an answer.
Okay, maybe
it's an experience. This experience of being a service is something that I've also done. So artists also in the other sense. So sometimes artists come looking for a service in something, and then I'm proposing something different. And they say, oh, that might be interesting. And we change ideas together just by interacting. The interaction is important. Making real the expectations is something that helps. But yes, often there is this idea. Okay, I have an idea. Please implement it. I'm not able to implement it. Please do that. And okay, not interesting, but not really easy often.
Super. So thank you really so much. If we don't have any more questions, I think that we can we have another or not? Okay. Yeah, we have someone that thank. So thank you so much for that three first very interesting and inspiring paper that you give us with a lot of generosity. And also thank to adapt your vocabulary, because for me, for example, that I am totally out of robot, it's a session that I can appreciate and perhaps understand. For me, what it's also important of my point of view, it's what the actor can have to that relationship with the robot, because this is important. For example, I work about mask, and when actor put a mask, feel something strange. So what is the feeling that the actor have with the robot? This is a question, and I think that we had a lot of questions that we will explore in the next 3 sessions. So thank you to Professor Dario, Professor Bonarini, and the researcher Pluta. Thank you very much. As I wrote in the conversation, we will send of all of you the form to register to the next meeting. So we will see the next time at the end of the March, the 26th of March, to continue that reflection about, and reflection about that 2 different words, theater and robotics. And thank you so much. And we can finish here our first session. Goodbye and best regard from me, Salvatore, and Erika.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.